Hello, Jerry.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
How's the event going?
It is going really, really well. Can you see into the room?
No, you have some kind of background up.
Do I really? All right. Let me see. Where do I go to get the background off? Oh yeah, I do have a background.
Looks pretty empty from the background you have up there.
Okay, so how do I turn a background off in Skype? Yeah, share screen chat.
For your video.
More?
Hang on, Jerry.
Yeah, no worries.
Choose background effect. There we go. And none.
There you go.
Yay.
All right. Okay, so let me do that. Okay, so you can come back on.
Okay. I should be sharing my screen now. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay, so thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And I've been keeping this under wraps, and there's been guys that have been bribing me for the last week, but nope, no way. So thanks again for doing this, and can you guys give her a round of applause for just coming in and being with us?
Oh, I appreciate that. It's quite an honor to come speak to you guys. Wish I could be there in person, but as we all know, it's kind of difficult.
Yeah. So you've got a new thing going, your augmented reality with Tilt 5. I guess, do you want to work backwards, start from Tilt 5 and then go kind of backwards, or?
No, I figured I would tell a bit of my backstory. I know some of the folks maybe know some of that. I'll cruise through that. I wanted to talk a bit about some of the retro projects I worked on, like the Commodore DTV and the Amiga on a chip that ended up getting canceled, which might be interesting. And then I can talk for just 2 or 3 minutes about what I'm doing currently.
Okay, awesome.
That sounds good?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you see my slide presentation?
So we've got your journey from farm girl to holograms.
Perfect. Yeah, I was raised on a small farm out in the middle of nowhere in Oregon, a kind of weird, nerdy kid with nobody else around like me. I was a kid that took apart all of my toys, so anytime my father bought me a present, I would rip it apart just to see how it worked. And this was quite frustrating for my father back in the day when I would do this, because toys are expensive, but I had to know how they worked. To keep me from tearing everything apart, one day my father brought me a big box of automotive light bulbs and a bunch of batteries and wires, and taught me how to hook them up and light up light bulbs. This was absolutely amazing for like a 7-year-old, and I proceeded to learn that I could hook all the batteries in parallel or in series, make a really high voltage, then burn them out spectacularly, and that was super fun. So I also remember a time where it's like, well, if batteries are good, sticking them straight into that the AC mains would be even better. So I took my desk lamp, unscrewed the light bulb, and tried to drop these little bayonet base light bulbs down into the big socket, which of course, delivered a huge shower of sparks, blew all the fuses in the house, knocked the power out, scared the heck out of me. And I was scared to tell my father what happened, but he quickly figured out, what I was up to. And so to feed my passion about electronics and technology, and to keep me from taking everything apart in the house. In fact, I took things apart like our VCR. He caught me one day with the top off the VCR, which was a very expensive thing back in the early 80s. At the time, he owned a gas station, and so out in front of his gas station, he put a box like "Bring Your Broken Electronics," and people would drop old electronics in this box, and he would bring it home every month or so to me, and it was so amazing. I would take all this stuff apart, and I didn't know anything about electronics. I was just having a good time looking at what was going on. But here's the connection to retro computers. So I was very fortunate to get into 8-bit home computers when they weren't so retro. One of our friends of the family had a TI 99 4A, and they sat me down in front of this, probably just to shut me up so that they could go have adult conversations. And I was completely enamored with it. So they turned it on. It was just hooked to a television, and it said something like "ready" on the screen. And I was like, oh, wow, I've seen these on movies. So I started typing on it like, draw house, syntax error. Paint house, make house, and it was just syntax error, syntax error. But eventually they gave me the programming manual for it, and I remember sitting there for like hours whenever we'd go visit them, typing in these programs. And one of the programs in particular that I remember was Mr. Bojangles. It was a dancing little sprite character on the screen. It was absolutely amazing. I was hooked on computers from that point on, and I started begging my father to get us a computer. So, back in those days, you had to go to the big box stores like Montgomery Ward's or Sears to look at computers and find anything out about what was available. And so we would go there, and there would be these long lines of computers set up on the display case, just sitting at basic prompts. And so I would be poking away at them and like begging my dad to get me a computer. And I was really attracted to the VIC-20. And the reason I liked the VIC-20 over all the other computers is it had really big font on it. The characters were really big, and I really liked that. But fortunately for me, my father got me the Commodore 64 instead, which was amazing. I remember, as a snoopy little kid, I was usually not allowed into my father's room, but of course I would go in there anyway. And one day I went in there snooping around, and I saw the boxes for the Commodore 64. So he was trying to save it as a surprise, but I was just so excited to play with it. There was my father. My father was single parent, so I spent a lot of time alone after school. So I would get into the closet, I'd pull out the Commodore 64 and carefully pull it out of the foam, and I'd set it up and I would play with it, and then I'd put it all back before he got back from work, and did that over and over again until he finally revealed it to me. And I was probably terrible at pretending that I was surprised, but that was pretty amazing. He got the printer and disk drive, which was really cool. But the Commodore 64 wasn't really easy to use as far as disk access, and we only had one disk, which was the sample disk. And I just remember, it had a couple blocks free of storage on it, and I wrote a couple basic programs, wrote it to the free space, and then I was out of disk storage for probably a year until I figured out how to format a disk. So, it's just crazy. I would type the thing in, and the disk would go off, and it would just sit there and whir for 5 minutes, and I thought it'd crash, so I'd turn it off. And it turns out it actually, in fact, these old Commodore 64 disk drives, 1541s, would take 5 or 10 minutes just to format a disk, and I didn't know. Being super curious, I didn't really know how these things worked, these computers. My dad had bought us a couple video game cartridges. And so these video game cartridges were super fun. I love video games. And I just figured inside these cartridges was just a bunch of connections of wires. So if I could make my own connections on the cartridge port, I thought that I could actually create my own video games. So I would stick forks and knives into the cartridge slot to try to make games. And of course, I was rewarded by these amazingly colorful screens of garbled characters and sprites and stuff that would just randomly pop up. I ended up burning out our Commodore 64 2 or 3 times, and it had to go in for service because I was just obsessed with trying to get my own video game to pop up by shorting out connections. So eventually, after a couple times of blowing up the Commodore 64, my father got us a +4 because obviously the C64 is junk and it just burns out all the time. I wasn't telling him that I was sticking knives and forks into the cartridge slot. And actually, this was, a lot of people don't like the Commodore's +4. This was actually the perfect computer for me at the time. It had a more advanced BASIC in it that allowed me to do graphics and draw circles and squares and stuff. It didn't have all of the things like sprites and fantastic sound like the Commodore 64, but I learned so much on this programming on the Plus4 because of the extended BASIC. Around the same time, living in this small community, I didn't have access to information about technology, but I ran into a couple ham radio operators in the local library, and they took me under their wing and started teaching me electronics, which was amazing. They gave me old radios and taught me how to make crystal set radios and stuff like that. A couple of them had their ham shack. It looked like this, just like gear everywhere. I was in heaven when I'd go over and visit and play around with electronics with them. And they gave me my first things like test gear and books on electronics. It was absolutely amazing. And this was really a pivotal point in my life where I started to go from not understanding to understanding how things worked. Of course, I redirected that into shenanigans. I'm probably like 12 or so at this time, or 13. And so I got into hacking on phones and phone phreaking and war dialing the entire area code, which was super fun. Back when phones kind of looked like this with little rotors on them. I ended up working all summer to get a Commodore 128 1 year, and that was amazing. It had even better basics, so I could do even more advanced programs. Wrote a BBS program for it, learned a lot about how hackers could hack your BBS if you don't filter your inputs. For example, I wasn't filtering the inputs as they created new accounts, so they were formatting my drive 8. Every time I would leave for school, I'd come back, someone would send a disk command and format my drive 8. So that was kind of funny. And then I eventually worked 2 full years, part-time jobs, and got the Amiga 2000. It was amazing. This computer had graphics beyond anything I could imagine. They had speech synthesis. I was just so in love with it. But it wasn't as easy for me to program. And in fact, I had both these computers, and I spent most of my time programming on the Commodore 128 and just playing games on the Amiga. At the time, I didn't have any money for games. I was a huge pirate. So, of course, I started connecting with all the disc trader folks in nearby towns, and I don't think I bought any legit software for quite a few years. BBSs were super popular back then. I was so into BBSs. Once I got my first modem, it was amazing. I got to meet all these people. Now that I look back, it's absolutely frightening that I was meeting all these strangers on BBSs. I was in my teens at this point. I'd gotten a car so I could go out and meet these people, and nothing bad ever happened, but we weren't even thinking about what bad could happen if you met people online. But it was really amazing. Played all these online doors for BBSs, and trying to make my own BBS as advanced as some of the other folks that were, nearby. I went through a really crazy phase in my teenage years. I went off, I did racing, I built race cars, and I kind of got out of computers for a while, and that was about a 5-year period. But then in the mid 90s, I opened a chain of retail computer stores selling custom-built PCs. That was pretty amazing. It's a long story. It took a long time to get off the ground, but once it did, it opened up a lot of opportunities for me. But as you can see, this is a picture from back in the day of one of my computer stores in the 90s, and I have, there's an Amiga poster up there, and there's probably a Commodore stuffed in the corner, and even though these computers were obsolete, I always displayed them in my computer stores. And I just remember, I had an Amiga 4000T or so around this time, and had it up on the internet, and people would come in and they'd what is this computer? It's so weird. Feels so different than everything else. Oh yeah, that's a totally obsolete Amiga computer, but they're really cool. At the same time, I started going to retro computer events, just like what you guys are at now. And since I was into electronics, I was always tinkering with electronics, and my kind of target area of interest was messing around with retro computers. So I had during my computer store days, I had enough money, I could buy better tools and do more advanced things. And I got into using these things called FPGAs. So these are chips that can emulate other chips. And just for fun, I started reverse engineering the Commodore 64 chips, taking it to different events and showing folks like these little circuit boards that I built that could emulate the SID or the 6502. And that was super fun. I didn't think anything like big was going to come of it. Struck a deal with a guy in Germany, and we built a little small run little FPGA emulator board, built a couple hundred of those. And yeah, it was just a fun little hobby for me. It was really cool going to all these events, like getting to meet like folks like Wozniak or Dale Luck, some of the original folks behind the computers that I loved so much. Bill Hurd, and it was really cool. And it started to kind of create this network that's, it's helped me a lot in my career even today, just attending these events. So my computer stores, ultimately the market for computer home or custom-built computers faded away, and so I learned all this stuff about electronics. So I decided to go to Silicon Valley and brute force my way into startups, and it was super challenging. No startup wanted to let me do a design for them because I hadn't gone to school. In fact, I'm a high school dropout. The whole racing thing was, caused me to drop out and go off and do that. But eventually I got a couple small companies to take a chance on me. One of them, they had a little solvent still, so I made a controller for a solvent still. And then I did another little project that was a controller board. And that just like ballooned and got into bigger and bigger projects. And eventually I started doing super advanced things, like I was doing chip design. This comes back to tying it to retro computers. I randomly got this call out of the blue from this company, and they're like, hey, we're trying to build a Commodore and a joystick that plays all your favorite retro video games. Like, can you make a chip for us? And I'm a little out of order in my story. Like, I hadn't designed a chip at this point, but I was like, yeah, sure, I could totally do that. And so ran into some folks like Robin and who was running the software effort on this, and we schemed up this plan of how we were going to build a Commodore 64 on a chip. We had to do it in like record time. It was like crazy. We had to reverse engineer the Commodore 64, get it on a custom ASIC and ready for production in like less than a year. And it was a brutal project. I built an FPGA board that emulated the Commodore 64, but it was missing a lot of features. We didn't have color video out of the emulation board until like 2 or 3 weeks before the actual chip was going to be made. Managed to squeak a few extra things in there, which was kind of amazing. And we had the chips made. We were so far behind schedule, the chip manufacturer didn't have time to do any prototypes, so they just built like 100,000 or 200,000 of these chips, just in hopes that they would work. They shipped them off to China, put them into the actual product, and they didn't work. It was super scary. The president of the company called me up and was yelling and swearing and just like so mad, like, you cost me millions of dollars. And I was just super frightened. He's like, you're going to get on a plane, go to China and fix this problem. Just fix it. So I jump on a plane, go to China, and get there. And lucky for me, the factory had changed the design. They had tried to cost reduce it on their own, so they threw away a bunch of components, and that's why it wasn't working. So we were able to get the project back on track. And the software team had added a bunch of extras to this project as well. And so I was there at the factory, and we had a secret little menu that you could drop into if you wiggle the joystick when it's booting up, and it had extra games and it had pictures and stuff in it. And the toy executives were, or some of the folks from the toy company were there in the factory, and I dropped it into the special menu, and they're like, what is that? And they're like, oh, well, we just added a few extra things. And they were furious. They're like, you can't do that. It may change our rating for child protection, yada, yada, yada. And they're like, you're forbidden to ever talk about it, and you're through with us. You're never going to do a project with us again. I'm like, oh, okay. So came back to the States and decided, well, if we're through with them, okay. My boyfriend at the time was like really good at doing web things. So he made a fake website that was supposedly like a blogger that worked at the Chinese factory, and he put a bunch of backdated blogs of the different toys that this blogger supposedly had hacked. And that now there's this new toy that you can hack, and it has all these other things, like you can hook a disk drive up to it, you solder a couple wires, or you can drop into these special games. And he managed to get it on Reddit, which was super, or not Reddit, Slashdot, that was popular at the time. Went absolutely viral. It was really amazing. The toy was being sold through QVC, which is a home shopping network, and they were just blown away. Like, these things were being purchased around the world, even though they were only marketing them in the United States. So hugely successful. The toy company was like, that was great. You know, we're not mad at you anymore. And, you know, you want to do more projects with us. And so, yeah, we did a ton of other projects. We did like a Williams home arcade and stuff. And this might be interesting for you folks. I haven't really told this story much, but I was commissioned to do an Amiga on a chip, and we got pretty far along with it. I had an Amiga with FPGAs hanging out of it, and we had it working, and we got to the stage where we were going to transfer it onto a chip, and then the project got canceled because the market for these kind of toys had dwindled. But it's amazing. Like, even today, people send me emails like, hey, I got the Commodore DTV, I've hacked it, I put it into a Nintendo case, I made a laptop out of it, I took it to a demo coding contest and won a contest. It's like, was absolutely a dream project, even though it felt like misery the entire time trying to get it done. It also kind of put me on the map, which led to like bigger opportunities in my career. Did a ton of toys, got to work on robots. I did a navigation system for a low Earth orbit rocket. So, you know, if any of you saw the rocket that flew off the launch pad a few weeks ago and flew sideways before going up, that was a project I worked on. By the way, they made it to space with a previous launch, so they blew a bunch of craters in the ground with other ones too. Never my fault. I had a great opportunity. I've always been into gaming, and so a company called Valve Software, a big video game company in Washington, recruited me. They gave me the grand mission of come in, find ways to bring the entire family together to play video games together. And so I put a dream team together, and we researched ways to make games more fun. We hooked electrodes to people's heads. We worked with AR and VR. We read people's emotions through, you know, galvanic skin response and fed that back into the games. It was really magical. And out of that, a lot of VR technology surfaced, and we actually seeded Oculus. The HTC Vive was our project. And out of that, I invented this really cool optical technique that can do augmented reality on tabletops that solves all these really tough problems that make VR and AR kind of not a great experience. And so that's what I've been doing for the last, boy, it's been going on 7 or 8 years. I actually bought the technology, this optical technology from Valve Software, because they didn't want to do tabletop video games. And I started a startup around it right about the time Oculus was just going gangbusters, and investors were going like crazy, putting money into companies. And what was kind of interesting about that is my first stab at this, we didn't have to really think about our market. We didn't have to refine anything too carefully. We just went out and got $15 million and just started trying to build things. And I made a ton of mistakes with my first startup. The first mistake was I was too scared to be the CEO of the company and lead it. And I outsourced that I hired CEOs who really didn't have any vision for the company. It took us in all kinds of crazy directions. And, you know, we just raised too much money without thinking about and having like really diligent plans about how we were going to launch the product. And we ended up blowing a $15 million crater in the ground, you know, just by, you know, just being completely randomized and not focused. And so it was actually Nolan Bushnell called me like the day or so after I blew up the first startup. And he's like, Jeri, been a big fan ever since I met you at whatever event, and I've been watching you from afar. I'm like, wow, oh my God, Nolan Bushnell, like, remembers me, like, holy cow. And he says, like, I could tell that you were going to tank the company. He's like, you need to be in charge of it. You need to drive the vision. Trust me, I've messed up enough companies to know. And he's like, I can't tell you how to do it, but you need to figure out a way to make this happen. Just go figure it out. And that was the catalyst that we needed. And I went to some of the core team like, well, that really sucked what happened. But, you know, what if we could do this again? And so I reached out to all my mentors, and they gave me pep talks and kind of guided me through. They're like, you know, you can actually buy the technology back. The bank has your technology. You can go to them and buy it. And so we scraped a bunch of money together, our own personal money, and we bought the technology back from the bank. And then we spent 4 or 5 months just thinking about what we were going to do and making business plans and refining it and running it past, you know, experts. And we're like, okay, our biggest problem was we weren't focused. So let's focus on video games on the table. Like, what if we could make this magical world that just springs out of the table, that anyone can play, just like the Valve, the kind of dream we had at Valve, that is so intuitive that, you know, you can just reach in, touch things, you can poke things with our magic wand, but it's also familiar. It feels like a video game. And so we refined that thesis over and over and over again until we were ready to go out. We raised some money from venture capitalists. We built some prototypes. We went out to events. We showed the product working with real games on it. And then we did a Kickstarter campaign, which was amazing. We were the largest ever Kickstarter AR project. And then from that, we were able to raise more money. We raised $7.5 million, a more reasonable amount of money. I've remained the CEO and the guiding light for the product, and things have been going really well. Right now we just started shipping our first units to our Kickstarter backers. We have over 30 games lined up. We have all kinds of games, that twin stick shooters, role playing, puzzle games. We have a platform on there that does tabletop games, so all your favorite games, everything from poker and checkers to licensed Euro style games. And that one alone has 100 games that you can play. And so, you know, things have been going a lot better for us after like getting a bit of scar tissue from the previous startup. That was a whirlwind story. I hope that made sense to folks. I'll stop sharing now.
No, I really appreciate you telling that story. It's amazing to see, you know, how someone like yourself started out from the beginning and got to where you are. Not a lot, you know, you see the beginning and the end, but you don't see what's in between. And what you've shared with us is just, it's really special. I'm really happy that you came on. Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. And
thanks. Yeah. Any questions before the last minute or two?
Well, yeah, I mean, does anyone have anything very like specific that you'd like to ask Jeri at all? I mean, you were very thorough about. I don't know what we could ask now about your life, because that was thorough.
Another question.
Okay.
There's going to be like a little mini Amiga that's going to be released soon. I was wondering if you had heard of it. You know how they released the C64 Mini and then they did the C64? Evidently, there's going to be an Amiga version done, and I was just wondering what your opinion is on it.
I don't know much about it specifically, but I'm super excited about these types of things. It's so much easier these days to make kind of mini versions of things, because now we have like these mobile processors that run at like a gigahertz and you can emulate really well. So that's opened up the opportunity to have lots of these like nostalgia devices. I love those. I collect retro computers. I have just about everything out there, Osbornes and Apples and, you know, Amigas and stuff. And then I buy all of these like retro throwback consoles too, and MAME machines, and I have my game console collection. So I have everything, you know, Channel F all the way up to like modern consoles. So I'm gamer through and through, and also computer nerd through and through.
Yeah, well, you're talking to the right audience, that's for sure. So when you had posted about the Tandy Radio Shack handhelds, why are you interested in those right now?
I've been going and getting things that I have a deep emotional connection to, even though I didn't own them. So in our little hometown, there was a Radio Shack, and you could go in and you could look at these very expensive things like the TRS-80, all-in-one computers, and they had the handhelds, which were, I think, based on Casio handheld computers, and I lusted after them, and so now it's like, I'm going to have them, I'm going to go get them, and so I've been collecting some of those recently. Another thing I've been collecting, I'm kind of a weird person. I just thought back to, I was in elementary school, and the first video camera I ever saw was a Betamax recorder that you slung over your shoulder, and then it had a cable up to this big camera. And as a kid, like a first grader, I was just like, oh my God, the future is here. Like, you can record and walk around. And so I've been collecting kind of memorable video camera technology. So I have like this, like the first Sony video camera that you could get, it's like from the 60s. I got one of these from the 70s, like a Betamax you could sling over your shoulder. I got the camcorder from Back to the Future, and it's like I have this dream in the office. I'm setting up our office ran till 5. We like to talk about like products and what was good and bad about products. So I bring in lots of things and set them up, and like game consoles, like the Sega game consoles that had like all these plug-in adapters. I'm like, let's never do that. That's like crazy. Confuse the end customer. Same thing about like video cameras. Like, I'm putting a little display together so we can kind of look at them and talk about like, here's video technology. It took 40 years until it was in your pocket, right? We're doing augmented reality. It's going to be 40 years, before everyone's like, they're not using phones anymore. They're using just magic AR glasses that sit on your face.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're the pioneer in that, then congratulations ahead of time. I think, yeah, no, that would be awesome.
What's cool around Till 5 is like, since we're all like, most of us are like retro collectors ourselves. Like, we have a lot of DNA about that. So there's a lot of aspects to it that are kind of like tried and true gameplay that we look for. Usability. We just think about like, what was the Atari 2600 like for the first people that got it? It's like, it's magic. Like, it didn't matter that it was a couple like blocks and stuff moving up and down. It was magic. And so we spend a lot of time talking about it, and it kind of keeps us in perspective. Like, we're selling freaking holograms on your table. It's kind of like the Atari 2600. It's like, we don't have to compete with Xbox and have that kind of level of fidelity. We just have to have fun gameplay, and it could be that simple as like a Pong.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's why we meet. And that's why you come to the conferences, all over, is because we have a love for something that maybe looks, weird now, but the nostalgia is still there, and we love it. So, yeah. Is there anything else?
I could go on and on. So sorry.
Okay. No, I got. Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you happen to have pictures of your collection, or the places where you collect all this stuff that you could share with us? I'm just wondering.
Not handy. It's too bad. I'm working on trying to get a lot of the really interesting pieces in the office. So maybe sometime in the future, you're definitely going to see it like on the Tilt 5 Twitter account. Like, we'll do an office tour, and you'll see a bunch of it. It's like, I just brought in the, what was it called? It was the Nintendo Bazooka. It's like the something scope. And I brought that into the office and showed the team, like, this is a piece of history. This is when Sega and Nintendo went in front of Congress, and Nintendo was trying to throw Sega under the bus and say that, Sega was causing all the violence in video games. And, then Sega's lawyers brought out this like bazooka you could buy for the Nintendo, and say like, oh, so we're the ones that are causing all the violent video games and destroying the youth. So it's those kinds of oddities I love to add to my collection, and I'm kind of gathering the really strange stuff for the office.
Yeah. Well, it'll probably, in another set of years, just like the slideshow that you showed us today, there, pictures of background of, the store that you started and stuff like that. It'll be the same with the Till 5. Those
Definitely.
pictures, yeah, you'll bring those up and say, here's the beginning of Till 5, and then we can see those collections in your office.
It's funny is I was just talking to one of my mentors recently, and this is probably really relevant to my story. I was complaining about something like it's really hard to manufacture in China right now. We can't travel to China. The supply chain is completely messed up. It's thrown us off by at least a year on getting the product out because of that. And I'm just like, I'm miserable. I hate this. It's terrible. And I'm just being a baby about it or something. And he reminded me, he's like, you're going to think back and be like, oh, those were the good old days. And that's how it always works. Like the Commodore DTV, like the whole crew, when we were working on that, I'm sure it was misery trying to get that done in such a short amount of time. Like, I'm never doing this again. And now I think back 20 years in the past, I'm like, oh man, those were the good old days. We were solving all these problems, and it was such a difficult thing, and we achieved it. And
yeah.
There's like all that nostalgia. I look at that picture of my computer store. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
And it's like the
sure.
things I didn't tell you about bootstrapping that computer store. Like, I was living in the back of the store eating ramen noodles, trying to bootstrap the company. It was misery trying to get my first computer store going. And then it took off, and then things were great. I had 5 stores eventually, but
yeah. I don't know what to say. I'm starstruck, first of all, because you're come on now, you're a star in our community of retro computing and not only retro but upcoming stuff. So it's been an absolute pleasure having you, and I appreciate that you came on, and it's very awesome. So
I'm so envious of all you guys that get to go to the event. So guys, have extra fun for me, and then send me a tweet about it.
All right. Yes, I will. All right. Thanks again. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Okay. See you, Jeri.